this has been by far the most successful festival we've had yet, and we're delighted to have you. Our author, Sarah Vowell, claims to be an informal historian, and I'm an informal introducer and a literary agent. And I thought I knew a bit about Hawaii, or as I thought I knew a fair bit about the rest of the world too. And it was not really until I arrived that I actually heard the story that she has to tell. And I think what's remarkable about her achievement is that she made the New York Times bestseller list in the first week of publication with a story that nobody on the mainland knows or really wants to know. Sarah Vowell is a historian adventurer. She's a very personal writer, but she really digs in. And I'm not going to take it any further because she's very good at telling about herself and about what she does. But anyway, please welcome Sarah Vowell.
I'll stay here. I like a fort. Aloha. What a nice turnout. I was trying to figure out what to do, and I realized this book is not for you. It's really for continental Americans. I'm at the end of my book tour, and most of my events thus far work on the level of Hawaii. People live there. And so I'm guessing you're kind of up on that fact. So I thought what I would do is I'll talk a little bit about Puritans, and then I'll read 2 or 3 passages, and then I will take questions, or more likely, comments. This book is, in a way, a sequel to my previous book, The Wordy Shipmates, which was about the founding of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the founders of Boston, who arrived in Massachusetts in 1630. And so this, because much of Unfamiliar Fishes is about the spiritual and literal descendants of those Puritans and their achievements, let's say, here in the islands. I thought I could talk a little bit about that aspect. The thing that drew me to the Puritans really is their writing and their love of knowledge and education and learning. And I had been sort of obsessed for a long time with the sermon that John Winthrop, the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, delivered before the colonists arrived in Massachusetts, the sermon called A Model of Christian Charity. And this is the sermon that's famous for giving us the soundbite about New England as a city upon a hill. And the thing that attracts me to that sermon is this one very beautiful sentence where Winthrop, when he gives this sermon, he's a layman, and he gives this sermon either back on shore in England or on the ocean on the way to Massachusetts. And 10 years earlier, the Plymouth Pilgrims had arrived in Massachusetts, and in the first year of their settlement, half of them died. And so this sermon is more like a pep talk, which Winthrop is telling his future neighbors, we're going to have to take care of each other. If we're going to survive, we have to be generous, we have to be charitable. And he says this sentence, we must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work, our community as members of the same body. Now this sermon, which is all about charity and generosity and a call for sharing, I had always loved that sermon, but I started working on that book after I watched Ronald Reagan's funeral on TV. And Sandra Day O'Connor read that sermon, in the service because of President Reagan's association with that phrase, the city upon a hill. Though he always called it the shining city on a hill, you know, because he's from Hollywood. But it struck me at that moment watching her read this sermon that's all about charity and generosity that it was a little ironic that a president whose administration was all about gutting every social program having to do with charity and generosity was associated with it. So I thought it was time to maybe revisit those people. The other reason I wanted to write about the Puritans is because I think there's a kind of stereotype of them as stupid. And, you know, they lived before the age of reason, so they did think and say some unreasonable things, but their love of literature and books, especially one book, let's face it, and learning is one, that and their sense of community that comes out in that phrase I just read is what really draws them to me. So I worked on that book, and while I was working on it, I came back here to Hawaii just kind of on a lark. I had a friend who was giving a concert here, and my friend was from California, and some of his friends from California were here. And the first time I came here, I came just to see Pearl Harbor, and I took a tour of the palace down the way, and I was so captivated by the story, which is, of course, not an entirely happy one, that I found myself trying to talk these Californians into leaving their beach chairs and coming to take a tour of the palace, and that was the moment I realized how interested in this subject I was. But there was so much that I could build on in talking about and researching the New England missionaries here that harkened back to what I was working on with the Puritans of Massachusetts Bay. And the Puritans of Massachusetts Bay are basically, with Winthrop and his shipmates, are kind of the inventors of what came to be called American exceptionalism, and that idea of New England and later the United States as a city upon a hill. Now, the thing about what Winthrop said in his sermon that sort of got lost is that, you know, New England, they could be this beacon of hope to the world, and everyone would look up to and admire New England and its experiment. But they could also fail, and the whole world would be watching them and their failure. And Winthrop defined that failure as a failure to take care of one another. That sort of that wasn't, you know, that kind of got lost, I think, somewhere in the ages, and it certainly wasn't how President Reagan thought of that speech, if he thought of that speech at all. So, but as part of that, there's one Bible verse that was important to that book and to this one on Hawaii. So I thought I would read this section from Unfamiliar Fishes about the Sandwich Islands missionaries and their association with this Bible verse. I'm talking about the Pioneer Company, and especially Lucy and Asa Thurston, as well as Hiram Bingham. And I'm starting this passage from after I've discussed Lucy Thurston and her, let's say, machismo. Whatever you think of these missionaries, they were tough. And especially the wives I became increasingly enthralled with, just because their lives were so horrible, you know. I mean, they had to do all that 19th century wife drudgery, as well as, you know, all the cooking and the cleaning and taking care of the children. And then they also had to, you know, teach school and deal with their husbands, who maybe weren't the most fun to be with, guys they could have picked. And, you know, they had to do all that pioneer stuff and you know, tell the Hawaiians how wrong they were. So, I mean, both of those things are full-time jobs anyway. And, you know, Lucy Thurston kind of captivated me just because, you know, she got breast cancer And I mean, she just wasn't a complainer. She got breast cancer. She couldn't have anesthetic, so she had her mastectomy sitting up in a hard wooden chair with the doctor slicing off her breast, her blood spattering in his eyes. And when it was over, she said this. She said that she was full of freedom. Now, that's just the kind of, can-do pioneer spirit that I think a lot of us modern-day bellyachers, could maybe look up to a little. So anyway, here. When the time came to ask the missionary board for new blood reinforcements to aid the pioneer company in their work, Asa Thurston sent headquarters, this is back in Boston, a description of the qualities to look for in an applicant. His ideal missionary bears a striking resemblance to his wife, the Good Sport. He wrote, "We want men and women who have souls, who are crucified to the world and the world to them, who have their eyes and their hearts fixed on the glory of God and the salvation of the heathen, who will be willing to sacrifice every interest but Christ, who will cheerfully and constantly labor to promote his cause." The request which we heard while standing on the American shores from these islands, which is complete and total bullshit, of course, we reiterate with increasing emphasis, "Brethren, come over and help us." If I had to pick one Bible verse that students of American history should know, it is Acts 16:9. "And a vision appeared to Paul in the night. There stood a man of Macedonia and prayed him, saying, 'Come over into Macedonia and help us.'" In the middle of his second missionary journey, the Apostle Paul had a dream or a hallucination in which a Macedonian stranger pleaded for his preaching. Paul dropped what he was doing in Asia Minor and immediately sailed across the Aegean. You have a dream, you do what the dream says, right? Okay. Theologians refer to this as the Macedonian call. For example, in his letter from a Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King Jr. writes, "Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid." For Americans, Acts 16:9 is the high fructose corn syrup of Bible verses. An all-purpose ingredient will stir into everything from the ink on the Marshall Plan to canisters of Agent Orange. Our greatest goodness and our worst impulses come out of this missionary zeal, contributing to our overbearing, yet not entirely unwarranted sense of our country as an inherently helpful force in the world. And as with the Apostle Paul, the notion that strangers want our help is sometimes a delusion. The forerunners of the New England missionaries, the Massachusetts Bay colonists, invented American exceptionalism, scrawling Acts 16:9 across their colony's official seal, in which an Indian literally says, "Come over and help us." Have you seen this seal? It's an Indian, and above his head it says, "Come over and help us." This is, of course, a little ironic considering the Massachusetts Bay colonists, as you might know, having some experience here in these islands with microorganisms and the wrath they can wreak. Massachusetts Bay colonists were able to move in and settle Massachusetts so quickly and readily because a few years before their arrival, a plague had wiped out most of the original inhabitants of Massachusetts, which the Puritans saw as a gift from God. Of course, the ones who were left, they, including the Pequot tribe, a few years after the Bay colonists' arrival, the colonists went to war with the Pequot and burned alive an entire village of Pequot, killing about 800 men, women, and children of the Pequot tribe that night, which I'm sure if some of them had seen that seal might have, rolled their eyes before they expired horribly. When Yale's Timothy Dwight, part of what my book is about too is the New England Protestant establishment and their influence not just on the Sandwich Islands mission, but also their relationship with Opukahaia, or as his anglicized name is known, Henry Obukia, who is basically the first Hawaiian Christian. I'm sure you're all pretty acquainted with his story. But when Henry, he got a job on a ship in the China trade that was based out of New York when he was living on his native Big Island, and ended up back in New England because that's where his ship's captain lived in New Haven. This kid, he just kind of stumbled into the arms of, the powers that be, the bright lights of New England Protestantism. Lucky him. And the brightest light is the president of Yale, a guy named Timothy Dwight, who was Jonathan Edwards' grandson. Jonathan Edwards, who you might know from the slasher sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. So all of these missionaries who came here, and the ones that Henry and some of his fellow Hawaiians met there, were, pretty much the highest echelons of New England Protestantism. So when Yale's Timothy Dwight delivered the founding sermon at Asa Thurston and Hiram Bingham's alma mater, Andover Theological Seminary, Dwight praised the doctrines carried to the New World by those eminently good men who converted New England from a desert into a garden. Hoping to inspire the Puritans' godly descendants to keep on gardening, Dwight preached that "come over to Macedonia and help us" is audibly resounded from the four ends of the earth. The nations of the east and the islands of the sea already wait for his law. Acts 16:9 is the meddler's motto, simultaneously selfless and self-serving, generous but stuck up. In every generation of Americans is born a new crop of Budinskis sniffing out the latest Macedonia that may or may not want their help. For the Thurstons and their brethren, it was Hawaii. So, the thing that draws me to these churchy New Englanders, I think, they're not perfect people, obviously, but their obsession with literacy that is Protestantism's core, it never stops fascinating me, just because Protestantism is a revolution, not just in religion, but also education, because a Protestant has to be able to read his or her Bible. And this has enormous consequences, I think, for most of the world that had contact with Christianity, but especially for lack of a better word, the riffraff. And I would include myself in this too. I'm now myself a bit of a heathen, but I was raised to be a holy roller, and I spent the first 11 years of my life in a tiny town in Oklahoma that was, let's call it, a country music town. And I didn't know, I maybe knew 5 people who, went to college as a child. It wasn't a literary town, and it wasn't an educated town, but that said, because I spent my entire childhood going to church 3 times a week, going to Bible studies, memorizing verses, it was, in a way, a very scholarly way of life that kind of opened up my later calling to me. And there were times that I was working on that Puritans book, or even working on this book, that I was such a homecoming, because I was having to look up Bible verses a few times a day, just as I had as a child. So even though personally, I don't believe in a lot of the cosmological aspects of Christianity. That aspect of both the New England Puritans and the missionaries here, their educational bent, the Massachusetts Bay colonists were barely finished nailing together their rickety little cabins when they were building Harvard, because they wanted their ministers to be educated, and they wanted their ministers to know Greek and Latin and Hebrew. And so, it was at the core of who they are. So, and similarly, their descendants, the Sandwich Island missionaries, for all their failings in terms of education and literacy, it was a pretty remarkable achievement, and just the what they did, helping to invent the written Hawaiian language, translating the Bible into Hawaiian, teaching pretty much the entire populace to read. It was an enormous achievement, and the fact that this place might have been the most literate place in the world in the 19th century is, I guess, something that fascinates me as a reader and writer of books. Not that they, this book has tons of stuff about what jerks they were too, but I thought I would talk a little bit about that. It seems to me, working on, anytime I write about pretty much any human being, so often, befriend any of them, it seems like, I think I come back to this over and over again in my writing, that the imperfection of humans and how a person's faults are often tied up with his or her greatest strengths. For instance, like that passage that I read of Winthrop, the thing that I admire so much about him, his poetic call for community and his real belief in that community. It is so inspirational to me and so beautiful. But the dark side of that, he gave that sermon. He was governor of the Massachusetts Bay, but he had yet to govern. And as governor, the dark side of the Bay colonists, appreciation of community was that anyone who spoke up, spoke out, who criticized the ministers or the magistrates, they were booted out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Or, one guy got his ears cut off, a lot of people were banished, the poor Quakers were hanged, so the thing that I admire so much about them is also the thing that I like the least about them. And I'm sure we all can look in the mirror and see that's true of ourselves as well, like I'm sometimes a bit of a loner, and I have, problems sometimes interacting with other people. This is one of my biggest faults, but it also enables me to live the right life of a writer quite comfortably, because you have to be able to sit in a room by yourself for 3 years at a time and not want to talk to anyone. So, but I digress. I found that too, working on, it took me a while to figure out how I was going to write about your king, Kalakaua, because he is, he's an interesting figure. And not without faults. The drinking and the gambling and the corruption. But it seemed to me, the more I learned about, say, his patronage of Native culture, especially the hula, putting that at the center of his coronation, and the way, I have a hula scholar friend who, he really admires Kalakaua, and that we have, the Merry Monarch Festival in his honor, and for that reason, it seems like to me those two qualities in him were kind of a piece, that he was a bon vivant and he had joie de vivre. I don't know why I need French words to describe him, but that was also, a bit of his downfall, and it was why, it's why he liked to have a good time, I think it was all like part of his character. And so that kind of thing, for me as a writer, I love writing about people like that because I identify with them, in some ways, like I can't really identify with, say, the missionary wives. I can see the value, and I can see the hard work, but I can't really, I honestly can't identify with choosing to live your life that way. But I digress. So maybe I'll just read. I thought, there are a lot of, there is a lot of history in this book, and even some ideas, but I don't like to get too abstract when I have people sitting in chairs in front of me, because my feeling is an audience is just a bunch of people who want to go home. So I thought I would read maybe a couple of passages that are just a little more informal, and maybe just me writing about my time here, which I have to say, really did enjoy, and I learned so much. And I mean, some of the people I learned from are here today, and I can't really thank the people of this state or whatever you think it is. I can't thank you enough. Just from I mean, that's when I'm happiest as a writer. I mean, writing books is a horrible, miserable way to make a living, but I do. I mean, I think part of why I do what I do is because I'm happiest when I'm learning, and I arrived here so ignorant that there was such a great learning curve here, and a lot of what I like to do is just kind of soak up local flavor, and you have that here in spades. So I'll read a couple of just short passages, and then I'll take your questions. When Jack Lord stands on a roof surveying the panorama of then Maud Honolulu, I'm on a balcony. Around here, it's called a lanai, on the 20th floor of the very same building, the Ilikai. While I command the same view as Jack and his jawline, this morning it's yet another foggy day. Fog, the volcanic fog blowing over here from Kilauea, is the most exotic air pollution my landlubber's lungs have ever coughed up. I wish I could say I was taking the Ilikai's elevator down to street level so as to get cracking on a day of thwarting PCP smugglers, just like Jack used to do every week, but I chose to stay in this building because it's walking distance to the mission houses, museums, library, and archives in downtown Honolulu. It's walking distance for me, a New Yorker. I realize none of you would ever walk that far. Where the closest thing to a felony is taking notes with an ink pen instead of a pencil. Perusing the letters and diaries the New England missionaries left behind is detective work of a sort, albeit an investigation whose only theme song is the faint rhythm of a gloved hand paging through the brittle correspondence of the dead. I was browsing through a box of papers belonging to Abner Wilcox, a Connecticut-born proselytizer on the island of Kauai. I found a memo he received in 1838 from the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, asking its missionaries scattered around the globe to send back to Boston items for a cabinet of curiosities they were assembling at headquarters, including warlike weapons, because these convey a vivid idea of the savageness of heathenism and impress the beholder with the reality of the dark places of the earth, which are full of the habitations of cruelty. Speaking of the habitations of cruelty, the Ilikai was designed by one of the architects of Seattle's Space Needle. It was the very first luxury high-rise hotel in this state. Elvis used to stay here. Its developer, Chin Ho, was a self-made millionaire who rose from peddling can openers to become the first Asian to run the Honolulu Stock Exchange. Detective Chin Ho Kelly on Hawaii Five-0 was named after him, which is a nice change of pace since most things around here are named for long-dead Hawaiian monarchs. Like, I wonder if Chin Ho Kelly or Chin Ho himself got their cavities filled at the King Kalakaua Dental Center. Does anyone go to the King Kalakaua Dental Center? No one? There's one, too. I noticed that on the bus one day, and I just thought, wow, you people love your monarchs. If you're like a dental office, you know. So here's just one more little passage. I was eating breakfast with my sister Amy and nephew Owen at a Four Seasons resort on the island of Lanai. Not the Four Seasons at the beach, the one done up in Hawaiian, Polynesian, Mediterranean styles with an Asian influence. No, we were at the Four Seasons in the Lanai Hills, decorated for some reason like an old English country estate. We had walked up there from Lanai City to see an old Norfolk Island pine tree, a gift from King David Kalakaua to Walter Murray Gibson that locals had saved from the resort's bulldozers by raising a stink. So we were sitting there on the set of Brideshead Revisited, eating eggs and Portuguese sausages, and the song Hawaii 78 starts playing in the background. We had walked up there from Lanai City to see an old Norfolk Island pine tree, a gift from King David Kalakaua to Walter Murray Gibson that locals had saved from the resort's bulldozers by raising a stink. So we were sitting there on the set of Brideshead Revisited, eating eggs and Portuguese sausages, and the song Hawaii 78 starts playing in the background. Before the singer breaks into English, he wails something in Hawaiian, and I can pick out Aina, the word for land. Owen asked, "Is this Is?" I might have marveled that this blonde, blue-eyed 8-year-old mainlander, baby Custer, I used to call him, recognizes the voice of the late Hawaiian crooner Israel Kamakawiwa Ole, affectionately nicknamed Iz. But it wasn't Owen's first trip to Hawaii. Anyone who has been to any of the islands for more than 15 minutes and hasn't heard Iz's cover of Over the Rainbow at least 5 times is not paying attention. In fact, on Owen's first trip to Hawaii, when I took him to the Big Island to cheer him up after he was diagnosed with the family wheat allergy my sister and I enjoy, the 3 of us were in line at a seaside resort's breakfast buffet, undoubtedly steering clear of the pastry selection, when the opening ukulele chords of Iz's Over the Rainbow came on the PA system just as it had every other time we left our room. A man behind us in line sighed noisily, complaining, "If I had $1 for every time I heard this song in Hawaii, I could afford to stay another night in this damn hotel." Over the Rainbow is as sweet and soft as trade winds rustling through palms. It is the perfect song for Hawaiian vacations because the tranquility of its sound captures the feeling tourists flock there to find, even though it is a song that is actually about the human inability to be happy where one is. It is not unlike the hymns the New England missionaries brought to Hawaii, advertisements for heaven, that other elusive elsewhere, where troubles melt like lemon drops. The trick of Iz's tender arrangement of the song is how convincing a case he makes that finally and for once you are here. In Hawaii 78, on the other hand, Iz confronts the price of that dreamy little swindle. Storm clouds gather over a crowded city, unless those are exhaust fumes, and he wonders what Kamehameha the Great would think of his kingdom being mucked up with highways and condominiums. "Cry for the land," Iz moans, earnest and mournful, as if singing from the bizarro B-side of Over the Rainbow. In Hawaii 78, he reaches an opposite conclusion. Our land is in great, great danger now. What is this song about? Owen wondered. It's about, I say, it's about how people like us wrecked this place. So that's a good spot to end, I think. And thank you. Now, if you raise your hand, I'll call on you and try and say it loud, and if I think people can't hear you, I will repeat it, but I will paraphrase, so. Anyone? Yes, ma'am.
Hello. Did you visit the Hawaii House?
So, oh, sorry. This woman first and then you, okay, ma'am? Go ahead. Oh, on This American Life. I used to work on the radio, and it's been a while. I don't know. These books kind of, became a full-time job. But there are always reruns. Yes, ma'am.
I was going to say, did you visit Kauai Church? Did you visit the graveyard where the old missionaries are buried?
The question is, the church over here, did I visit the graveyard? Of course. Often. Yeah. That church is... I read a little bit about the coral blocks, and especially not just the church, but also I think it's the Chamberlain House across the way. And that was just so symbolic to me that, the coral blocks, whatever you think about that environmentally, are very beautiful building material, but the missionaries, you can see at the Chamberlain House, built that out of the coral blocks, but then covered over them with like a plaster and incised, bricks to make it look like a New England house, which to me sort of symbolized what they were up to here, just in general. Yes?
Aloha.
Aloha.
Working on now, and when you're done with a book, for example, say Assassination Vacation, are you done with the whole fascination with all these assassination locales, or do you continue to visit them?
The question is, do I maintain my interest? I mean, it depends. Like with the assassination book, I had to go to, like places like the McKinley Memorial in Canton, Ohio. I have not been back there since. But, like this place, this is really the end of I've been a traveling book salesman for a couple of months now, and this is my last day, and like when we leave here, that'll be the first time in years that I will be in this place without being under a ton of pressure to learn as much as I can, so that I will be just like all the other people from over there. I feel like me, and especially my family, my sister and my nephew who came with me on a lot of these trips, I really did kind of fall in love with this place. So I could definitely see coming back here. But I generally, because I generally do kind of, finish and move on. But I feel like this place kind of sucked me in. So I would hope to keep returning here, for the rest of my life. Always suck up to the locals. Hello, Honolulu. Yes, way back there.
Do you use your nephew as a voice to help you to bring history and to basically educate you?
Do I use him mercilessly? Yes. Everybody has to earn their keep. My sister does the driving, and he advances the story. It started out like when he was very little, I would quote him just because he was kind of a malapropism machine, or he just had this way of looking at the world that I found entertaining, like when we went to, say, the cemetery where President Garfield is buried, he called that a Halloween park. And I was like, that's actually a pretty accurate description of what a cemetery is, but now that he's older and more of a boy, he doesn't just, he has opinions and thoughts, there are sometimes he really makes me come back to earth. Like, I took him to the whaling museum in Maui, and I get so caught up in what I'm learning, the lingo and the definitions and the history, like with whaling. And because I'm a huge Moby Dick fan, like huge. I love the language of whaling and how vulgar it is, and the butchery. It's so dramatic and homoerotic apparently. And I just get caught up in trying to learn what does top gallant or gallant mean, or what's a forecastle, or just like statistics and figures and the history and how many barrels of oil that one expedition could acquire, like all that stuff. And I took him to the whaling museum, and he would not stop bugging me because every step of the way he would come over to me and outraged, they killed whales, every 45 seconds. Oh my God! He sees a harpoon and he reads what it's for, and he's like, he's kids and animals, and I don't know. It's just funny to he just reminded me oh yeah, this was really disgusting and fairly ruinous for whales. So there's sometimes he just like brings me back to, he's almost the voice of the reader sometimes. Yes, sir.
Can you draw comparisons between the New England Protestant Church and your efforts at literacy for Hawaiians with those Protestants in the South that beat and killed black people on the plantation for having tried to learn to read as well?
What a fun question. Did everyone hear that? Comparisons between the Protestant New Englanders and the Protestants in the South who punished slaves for trying to read and write. I mean, I hadn't really thought about it. I would say, the ones in the South, like, they're doing it wrong, like that. In fact, some of these missionaries here were quite, all of them really were fairly idealistic. Whatever you think about the results of especially their children and their children's impact on these islands, the ones, especially in the pioneer and the early companies, were total idealists and, selfless givers of their time, really. And so much of what they had to do involved literacy and teaching people to read and, translating the Bible into Hawaiian. So, I don't know specifically what their reactions would have been to, trying to keep slaves from reading and writing, but I can imagine they would not have been in favor of it. But, on the other hand, the reason that they were trying to deny those people the right to learn how to read and write was because they understood that reading and writing is power, that knowledge is power, the ability to acquire more knowledge, and the ability to express one's opinion about said knowledge, like that is a powerful thing. So if you want to keep a whole class of people from rising up against you, keeping them from reading and writing would be a good idea, and making sure that they couldn't do that. So on the one hand, yeah, it's heinous. On the other hand, it speaks to the power of language and books and writing. That was just me looking on the bright side. Yes, ma'am.
We tend to be rather cliquish here, and I wonder.
What?
I wonder how you found entree into the various circles.
Oh, her name's C.D. Douglas. I'm sure some of you know her. Honestly, I would just meet one person who introduced me to more people, but I would say C.D. or Laurel is her real name, who is a missionary descendant, but not happy about it. A Punahou grad who does a lot of research. Her ancestors were the cooks who ran the Royal Children's School, and she makes it her mission in life to expose her great something grandfather for the evil child whipper he was. And so because she moves in both worlds as missionary descendant, and she hangs out with a lot of those rabble rousers. She introduced me to quite a number of people. And I met her because I was hanging out at the Mission Houses Library where the Hawaiian Historical Society is, and the Barbara from the Historical Society introduced us. So it was sort of like one person led to another, and I had to go, I met some of the Punahou people because I wanted to go there to see that place because that school is part of this story. And so, I became friends with some of those teachers. And just, I know there are different cliques, but I found nothing but, support and help and generosity, really. Maybe I was doing it wrong, but, no one shut me out. I got the feeling that it's a story that people want told and want it told truthfully, whatever that might mean. So I mean, for the story, it was that I told, it was great. You know, I mean, one of my favorite parts of the book is me hanging out with the Hawaiian Independence Action Alliance, I believe it's called, on the day they were preparing for one of their actions, and just kind of hanging out with them. And, you know, they were making signs, but also talking. And, I mean, it seemed to me so much of the independence or sovereignty movement, there are other things that those people care about and are involved in. And so it's just... like, you know, at that, I don't think I mentioned it in the book, but, you know, a lot of what we talked about that morning was toxic dust, you know? So I guess I could write a whole sequel about the American military and its impact on these islands environmentally, which would be an even more fun topic. But I don't know, there's a real community feeling here that, I mean, other places have, but because you're all on an island, you know, it is small, and people seem to know one another, and I don't know if you realize, sort of in a way, how fortunate you are. Even like those of you who squabble with others, like there's still this real depth of knowledge and passion about this subject that just is not true in anywhere, you know, in the continental U.S. except for maybe Utah. Where like there's a real community and everyone is very up on things and, like, you know, bickering and squabbling and, you know, flirting and fighting, as the rock critics say. And so for me, it was just, you know, it was just Candyland of you know, seditious thought. No, yes. Have I ever researched my own Native American roots? Yeah, I've written, my family is Cherokee. I also have some Seminole ancestors. I wrote a very long piece that was also an hour-long documentary about the Trail of Tears once for This American Life. And in fact, for this book, because the same group of missionaries who Christianized and Americanized you people, that same group, you know, went down and Christianized and Americanized the southeastern tribes, including the Cherokee. And the school that you know, some of those Hawaiian students went to in Connecticut, including Henry Obukia / Opukaia, that same school, two of the Cherokee, I guess you could call them traitors, who made the secret deal with the U.S. government that gave the government the sort of Band-Aid approval for the Trail of Tears. They went to that same school. They got there just a few months after Henry died. And so I'm reading, when I was researching this story, you know, like sitting over there in Mission House's archives and going through all the old mission reports and then the published annual reports by the ABCFM. I mean, I would read about what was happening over here and then, you know, come across, you know, names I've been hearing my whole life about some of those Cherokee students like Elias Boudinot or John Ridge, who played such a real role in the Cherokee tribe and in the Trail of Tears. So this was, there were a lot of, you know, there was an overlap. So when I went to Cornwall to Connecticut to see that school where Henry and the other Hawaiian children went to school, I mean, the same thing. I had another kind of reason for being there, you know. And in fact, those two Cherokee boys ended up, they're the reason that school got closed down, because they ended up marrying local white girls. And the second of those marriages, the Indian boy and the Connecticut white girl were burned in effigy in a public, in a public protest of their marriage, and the effigies were lit by the white girl's brother. So in some ways, I guess I had new insight into the Trail of Tears and why those two boys would have led the betrayal of the tribe by signing the treaty with the U.S. government. Maybe they were... Maybe they just thought, let's cut our losses, take the money and run and get out of here. I mean, I can't really blame them for perhaps, questioning white people and their, their relationship. So yeah, I have, and it definitely played into this story. And I mean, it was sort of, I guess, nice. I mean, the one thing I love about your archives here is they're like, I don't know, they're like a swap meet or something, because you're like, all these townspeople they're looking stuff up all the time, and your archives are so lively and kind of community spirited in a way that, where I come from, it's more like academics, and no one talks to one another, and there's a lot of shushing. But here, sometimes like I would get jealous of all of you because, I would be over in mission houses or at the Bishop Museum, and people or at the state archives, which was so helpful to me, and people wanted to like look up and find out where their ancestors' graves were, or there's a lot of ancestor research, and sometimes I would get jealous, like, because I guess I'm such an outsider to this story, but then, I would read those reports and see some of my people's name, and it would give me a little jolt, I guess. Am I out of time with all of my pontificating? I really want to thank you all for coming so much. This is such a nice turnout. It's so nice to be back here.
A secret from you, which is who I am. I'm Roger Jelinek. I'm the executive director of the festival. And in that role, I'm the chief fundraiser. And so I'm going to give you a challenge. I'm going to have Sarah sign this book, and I'll put it in the Barnes & Noble store, and we'll have a silent auction, and at 4 o'clock, the highest bidder gets the book. Again, thank you very much, Sarah Vowell.